So, do you place much stock right now in what President Trump alluded to on Friday, possibly ending the federal ban?
Well, it's consistent with what he said during his campaign when he was asked about legalizing marijuana. He said he supported medical marijuana when it came to recreational marijuana. He was not keen on that, but he said it should be left up to the states. He said that a few times. Since he was elected, there have been some mixed signals, especially from his attorney general. But saying that he would support a bill that would leave this issue up to the states is completely consistent with the positions he staked out when he ran for office.
And Jacob, that's where I would be. I assume that's where you would be. What would be the arguments for keeping the federal ban?
Well, if you don't like the idea of marijuana being legalized anywhere in the country, like Jeff Sessions does not like that idea, then I think you would want to retain the federal prohibition over the whole country for as long as possible. In practical terms, there's not really much somebody like Jeff Sessions can do. He can, make trouble for the legal marijuana industry in states like Colorado and Washington and California, but he can't really put the genie back in the bottle. So he's going to have to learn to live with it one way or the other. So it's just a question of how soon the federal government will start to accommodate the states that have decided to legalize.
So Jacob, lifting the ban, what would be some of the immediate practical effects?
Well, the bill that that Trump was talking about would make the federal ban inapplicable to actions that are legal under state law. So the federal ban would still be in place for states where marijuana remains illegal. It would still cover people who try to smuggle from a state where it's legal to a state where it's not legal, people trying to sell it to minors, that sort of thing. But in general, if actions related to marijuana are legal in the state where you're doing them, they would not be illegal under federal law. They would be allowed under federal law. So that's a big deal because all the people in the industry would no longer be committing federal felonies every day when they open their doors. It means the people that they have to deal with will be less nervous about dealing with them. So I'm talking about landlords, banks, really any vendor could be, in theory, could be charged with conspiracy to violate the drug laws, aiding and abetting, that sort of thing. There's all kinds of problems for banks in terms of both criminal issues and civil, regulatory issues when it comes to dealing with what is still a federally illegal drug trafficking operation. And then another crucial thing is the tax treatment for marijuana businesses. They currently are not allowed to deduct their business expenses, which, as you can imagine, is a huge handicap for them. They would be able to file taxes like anybody else once this bill was passed.
So, Jacob, the bigger, broader view here is America is moving toward legalization, aren't we? I mean, state by state by state. You see that.
Yeah, it's a gradual process, but the latest Gallup poll showed that even a majority, it wasn't a large majority, but a majority of Republicans support legalization. And what's interesting is that if you look at Republicans, an even larger majority says, even if I don't approve of this, it should be left to the states. So they're willing to tolerate the idea that it would be legal in some places, even if it's not legal in their state.
And why, to folks listening to us right now, Jacob, why is that a good thing in your eyes?
Well, I mean, the main reason it's a good thing is that people should not be punished for doing things that don't violate anyone's rights. I mean, this is very much analogous to the alcohol industry, which, it was a crime to produce and sell alcohol for about 13 years. That was recognized to be a mistake. It is completely arbitrary which substances the government decides are acceptable and which ones are not, largely a matter of historical happenstance. And whose drugs they are perceived to be, right? And the story with marijuana, I think, is largely a story of a drug that was identified with outgroups, with minority groups, with foreigners becoming part of the mainstream. So now it is a rite of passage for most Americans at this point. I mean, people who are young to at least try this drug that used to be associated with despised groups. So it's very much a white middle class mainstream thing. And I think that is a big part of the explanation for why you have majority support for legalization. It's something that is now familiar to people, and it's much harder to demonize something that's familiar.
Do you expect, last question, Jacob, do you expect anything done at the federal level?
Yes, I think eventually there will be an accommodation like the one that is laid out in this bill. It's just a question of when it will happen. I think if Trump is smart, he will do what he promised to do. One way of appealing to him might be to say that this is really going to annoy Jeff Sessions. He's not getting along with him well and hasn't been for some time.
Yes.
So maybe that would be a good reason, for him, if in personal terms, for him to support the bill. But if you are consistent in terms of supporting the Constitution and supporting a federalist system, even if you're not crazy about marijuana, you really have to say this is not the federal government's business and it should be left to the states.